So last time we were together, we talked a little bit about the heart. We talked a lot about the heart. And we just kind of talked about the parts of the heart and the structure of the heart, where it's located. We also talked about a little bit about how the heart works, and we talked about blood pressure. And so all those things are really important. And so what we're going to do today for the next few minutes is we're going to talk more about the specific blood vessels in our body. And of course that relates to the heart, the cardiovascular system, because the heart pumps the blood and then it travels through these pathways to get to our cells. So like we said last time and the time before, blood's really important. Every cell in our body has to get blood because it has nutrients and oxygen and water and electrolytes and all those things that cells need to be able to stay alive. And then it also produces, the cells also produce waste products that then get transported by the blood to the kidneys and lungs and stuff. And so those things are really important. So the heart has to work, but you also have to have the pathways that get you to where you need to go. So when we talk about the pathways are going to be our arteries and our veins. So large blood vessels going away from the heart are called arteries. And those are the biggest ones going away from the heart. As they move further and further from the body, we'll have transition areas where they branch and they get smaller. And those are called arterioles. And then as they branch and get smaller still, they'll eventually become what are called capillaries. And so it's at the capillary level where we see most of the nutrient and gas exchange between the blood and the cells and the blood. And so that's really important. And then as we go back to the heart, those are going to be veins. So veins carry blood back to the heart. The capillaries then will come together and form venules. The venules come together and get bigger and bigger, and they form veins, and then the veins are the ones that dump into the heart.
And the venules is the smaller part, or smaller ventricles, no?
Venules are smaller veins.
Okay.
Yeah, so like intermediate veins. So the biggest ones are veins, the smallest ones are capillaries, and then the intermediate ones are venules.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Great question. So a lot of people, when they think of an artery, they think of oxygenated blood, and when you think of veins, you think of deoxygenated blood. A lot of times that's true, but it's not always true. And so make sure when you think about the difference between arteries and veins, we'll talk about some other ones in a second, but one of the primary differences between them is that blood flows away from the heart in an artery and blood flows towards the heart in a vein or venule. And so make sure you keep that straight because it's an important distinction, and a lot of times teachers will put questions like that on a test, and so you don't want to miss points on that, or ever, of course, but now you won't on that, hopefully. Okay, so we talk about blood vessels. Blood vessels have three main layers. Large blood vessels have three layers. The outermost layer is called the tunica externa or tunica adventitia, and it's primarily made up of connective tissue. So the connective tissue then helps encapsulate the vessel, it helps connect it to the tissues around it, hold it in place, that kind of thing. The next layer in is called the tunica media, and the tunica media is smooth muscle. And so this is important. When you think about smooth muscle, one of the main characteristics of smooth muscle is that it's involuntary. And so that means that our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system are going to help control how those blood vessels work. If they get bigger in diameter or vasodilate, or if they constrict, and that's going to help distribute where the blood goes and also blood pressure and things like that. So that's going to be important. And then the innermost layer of a blood vessel is called the tunica interna or the tunica intima. And the tunica interna or intima has a couple different parts, but the innermost part is made up of what's called endothelium, which is simply a single layer of simple squamous epithelium. And so simple squamous epithelium is very thin, it's very fragile, it's thinner and more fragile than tissue paper. And that lines the inside of the blood vessel, and that's important because it creates a very smooth surface so the blood can move easily through the blood vessels. It's continuous with the endocardium. So endocardium and endothelium are basically the same thing, they're just in different places. So they're both simple squamous epithelium, but the endocardium is on the inside of the heart, it lines all the chambers and stuff, and the endothelium is on the inside of the blood vessels. So it's important to have this thin layer. This thin layer reduces friction between the blood and the walls of the blood vessel, reduces peripheral resistance. It also creates a nice surface that is not likely to cause, is easily cause blood clotting or the buildup of cholesterol and things like that. So as long as that lining remains intact and continuous, that's really, really good for our body. A lot of times what happens, especially when people have really high blood pressure, is these cells will get damaged because the blood will be hitting them so hard that it'll break them off, and then you get rough surfaces, you get turbulence, you get friction, you get cholesterol buildup. There's all kinds of things that happen, and the cholesterol and fat will leak underneath the endothelial cells and leads to stenosis and cardiovascular problems. So we don't want that to happen. So one of the really good things about having low healthy blood pressure is that you don't damage that tissue, and it helps with circulation, it helps perfuse your tissues and things like that. So these three layers are the same in the large arteries and the large veins. We have those three layers. They're made up primarily of the same kinds of tissues. Differences between them, if you look at these two pictures, are that the tunica media in an artery is much, much thicker. The tunica media in a vein is much, much thinner. Another difference you notice here is that veins have valves. So large veins have valves. And that's important because, like we talked about last time, as the blood moves away from the heart, the pressure drops and eventually goes basically to zero. And to get that blood back, there's two main ways that we get blood back. One is through muscle contractions that squish the blood vessels. So because the tunica media is so much thinner, it's super easy to squish these veins. So the skeletal muscles, the strong skeletal muscles in our legs, in our ankles and calf muscles, those kinds of things, as we're moving around and walking, they squish those blood vessels, and it smashes the blood and it forces the blood to either go up or down. Well, if there's a valve here that prevents the blood from going down, it can only go up. And then the vessel relaxes, the blood pools, and then you squish it again and it forces the blood to go up. And so that's one of the main ways we get the blood back to the heart. And then inside the abdominal cavity and the thoracic cavity, same kind of principle, except the movement might be because of, like we're moving around, but pressure changes because of breathing or movement because of digestive functions or something like that. And so movement's really, really good for our bodies. If we can move, it really helps our circulation, it helps move the blood and perfuse our tissues and stuff. So that's really a really good thing. So if you ever have the chance to like touch a cadaver or to do a surgery or something, if you touch a vein is very flaccid. It has, unless it has blood inside of it or something inside of it, it's just completely flat. It's like a plastic bag with nothing inside of it, just flat. An artery is like a garden hose. You could squish it, but as soon as you release it, it will pop back open and it will retain its shape. And so you can tell very easily the difference between them, and the differences are because of what they do. So we want these to be really squishy. We want valves to be in here. Those things are important because that's how we get blood back to our heart. We want this to be pretty substantial. Now, one of the things about arteries also is that in the thick tunica media, that's the smooth muscle, there's also a lot of elastic connective tissue intermingled in there. And what that does is it gives the blood vessel compliance. So it can kind of stretch, but then it maintains its shape. So that's good for two reasons. One is because these are usually closest to the heart. So they're going to get the most pressure. So as the pressure coming from the heart goes right into the aorta or these big blood vessels, they can stretch a little bit, and that prevents damage on the inside of the blood vessel. But they still maintain most of their shape, which maintains the pressure. So we don't want them just to go, because then you lose pressure and then you can't distribute the blood to your body. And so you have to have that pressure maintained so that it can move to the periphery and perfuse our tissues. And so those are the main differences between them. As we mentioned before, the biggest ones are going to be closest to the heart. So as the blood comes out of the heart, there's going to be big blood vessels there. Primarily we're talking about like the aorta. And then the aorta, as it moves away, there's going to be branches that will come off and it will get smaller and smaller. And so you can kind of see the same thing here when you look at these pictures. So these are histology slides of tissue. And so in this picture here, you can see that it's a very thick muscle layer there. And in this picture here, the muscle layer is very thin. And so you kind of see the differences there. But those are really important, and that helps with the functionality of what those blood vessels are going to do. And as they move, again, as we mentioned, as they move further away from the heart, they're going to get smaller. And so the arteries will then form arterioles, and then they get smaller and they form capillaries. When you get to the capillary level, basically what a capillary is all the outside stuff is gone, the tunica externa and tunica media, and basically all you have left is the tunica intima or interna. And so that's a capillary. And so it's mostly just going to be simple squamous epithelium with a little bit of stuff to kind of hold it together. And that's important because simple squamous epithelium is so thin that you can diffuse things like gases like O2 and CO2 can just simply diffuse across those membranes, which is great because it doesn't take any energy. So I don't have to have energy to push those in or out. They just follow their concentration gradients to get in and out. And then I can perfuse my tissues and get rid of my waste product, and then also nutrients and stuff like that can get in and out really easily. So let's talk a little bit about just one or two more things and we'll move ahead. But as you look at the blood vessels, the arterioles, as they go into a capillary bed, right before they start going into capillary beds, the smooth muscle will change from being continuous all around the blood vessel to little sphincter rings that allow the blood to go into these capillary beds. This is really important. In our periphery, we have so much surface area that if all the blood goes into our capillary beds at the same time, there won't be any blood left in the in the blood vessels, and your blood pressure will drop to zero. So it's kind of like if you have a sprinkler system in your house, you turn on all the sprinklers at the exact same time, no water comes out. So you can only turn on one at a time, and then you turn it off and you turn on the other one. And that's kind of how our body is. It'll open up one here, and then I perfuse this tissue, and then it closes that and opens it up somewhere else. And so you kind of circulate through your body depending on how activity level and the kind of activities you're doing and so forth, so that you maintain some peripheral resistance. To kind of illustrate this point also, one of the problems that happens to someone when they go into shock is that their blood vessels vasodilate. And so because of like an infection or whatever the situation is, if all your blood vessels vasodilate at the same time, you lose your peripheral resistance. And that's one of the things that happens is that people that go into shock, their blood pressure drops. And so, of course, if you don't have any blood pressure, you can't keep getting blood to your brain and to your body, and then your tissues die, and that can kill you. And so then you do things like put your feet up, elevate your feet, and that pushes the blood back towards the heart. When you do things like take vasoconstrictors, and that constricts the blood vessels, which increases peripheral resistance. And so those things are important. Anyway, so that's kind of the idea of how the blood flows and where it's going. What I'd like to do next is talk a little bit about some of the actual names of blood vessels that we have in our body. And so we're going to take a minute and we're going to draw a couple pictures on the board and talk about these blood vessels. But let's just look at this picture here before we do that. So this shows diagrammatically what a person looks like and some of the main blood vessels all over the body. Of course, you look at a picture like this, it's hard to see everything because there's so much detail to it. And so what we'll do is we'll kind of draw our own picture and kind of blow it up a little bit. We're not going to be able to show every single name or every single blood vessel, but we can show some of the main ones. We'll show some of the main ones, and then hopefully that helps you guys know what you need to know. But one thing you want to think about is, as you talk about these blood vessels, just like other structures in our body, most of the time they're going to be named for where they're at. So you're going to have like axillary stuff, and you're going to have brachial things, and you're going to have stuff like that. They're going to be named for these regions that we've talked about. And so keep that in mind, because a lot of times the names will tell you exactly where the blood's going or where they're found. And so so that's what we'll do next. This is very anatomically correct, so you better watch 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just kidding. It's not anatomically correct at all. But it's not a stick figure. This is our person. That's a great picture. Wow. Awesome. Okay, here we go. So we're going to start here-ish. That represents the heart.
Okay.
So the diaphragm's going to be about right there. And again, it's not anatomically correct, so don't be too critical of my amazing drawing skills. As the heart beats and the blood leaves the left ventricle, it's going to go through the aortic semilunar valve, and it's going to enter the aortic trunk. The aortic trunk then is continuous with the ascending aorta. Ascending aorta then arches over the top of the heart and then goes peripherally. So it goes behind the heart and down through the thoracic cavity. And then it's going to go through the diaphragm into the abdomen. Okay, so the aorta has a couple different parts. It has the trunk, the coronary arteries come off the trunk. It has the ascending aorta, that just means the blood's going up. And then the arch, that's the part that arches. One of the important things about the arch is that the arch has 3 branches that come off of it. The first branch that comes off of it is going to go to 2 places. And the first branch is called the brachiocephalic artery. So let's think about that name. So brachio, what does that mean? Brachio means arm. Cephalic or ceph, that means head.
Okay.
So this blood vessel is going to take blood to the arm and the head. And this one goes to the right arm and the right side of the head. So shortly after the brachiocephalic comes off the aortic arch, it splits. And like its name implies, like we just said, part of it goes to the head and part of it goes to the arm. The part that goes to the head, wow, this, I really drew it like his shoulders are like massive and his thorax is like teeny, whatever. Okay, so it's gonna go up and then it's gonna split into 2 parts. That was really big too. And this is called the carotid artery, right carotid. Oops. So the right carotid artery runs up the right side of the neck. It's right on the right side of the trachea. And as it goes up about where the mandible is, it splits. Where it splits is called the carotid bodies. And this is a really important area for baroreceptor function and some of the regulatory functions that help maintain blood pressure and stuff. Bodies. And then it splits into an internal and external carotid artery. So the internal carotid artery goes up, it goes through the carotid canal, and then it enters the skull. So this blood vessel is one of the main ways that we get blood to our brain. So it goes up, it goes to the carotid canal, and then it enters and joins with what's called the cerebral arterial circle, or the circle of Willis, which forms a circular function around the base of the brain, and then branches come off and feed the brain in different places. The other branch stays superficial, so it comes under the mandible and comes out or under the chin, and then it splits. And that's going to feed the muscles and the skin and all the structures of the face and the scalp and so forth. And that's called the external carotid. And so then that feeds the face. Okay. So then the other branch off the brachiocephalic is going to go over to the arm, and it's going to continue down through the shoulder. When it gets to the elbow, it splits into 2. And then it goes down into the hand, and then it comes back together and forms a little arch down here that has branches that go off to the fingers. And so let's talk about that. So after the carotid artery comes off the brachiocephalic artery, then this is called the subclavian. And so sub is under, clavian's like clavicle, so it goes right under the clavicle, and then it moves a little bit further along. There's other branches that come off that we're not going to worry about, but when it gets to the armpit area, then it's going to be called the axillary artery. And then again, there's a couple of things that happen. Muscles cross it in certain areas and give a landmark, and once it passes those, it's called the brachial, meaning arm. And then where the elbow is, which would be right around here on our guy, this is called the antecubital fossa. So the part in front of the elbow is the antecubital fossa, and the brachial artery then is going to split into two branches. In anatomical position, the one that's more lateral is called the radial artery, and the one that's more medial is called the ulnar artery, because they run along those bones. So they're right next to the radial bone or the ulnar bone, and so that's what those blood vessels are called. And then you come back together in the hand, in the palm of the hand, and you form what are called the palmar arches. And then you have blood vessels that come off of those and go straight to the fingers and stuff. So now there's a lot of detail we didn't go into, but these are some of the main blood vessels that you're going to see. And so to know those, it's probably a good idea to know these. But that's the first branch off the aortic arch. The second branch off the aortic arch is called the left common carotid. It comes up, it splits into two branches. One of them goes through the carotid canal, the other one stays superficial. It's the exact same thing as the right carotid artery, except it's on the left side instead of the right side of the neck. Left carotid, internal, external. The one thing that's different, that's very obvious, is that here, the first branch off the aortic arch has a brachiocephalic artery. The next one doesn't. So this one's the left common carotid, comes straight off the aortic arch. This one's going to be called the subclavian. So instead of starting from a common vessel and then splitting, they both have their own originating spot off of the aortic arch. And so then this one is going to come over here. The same thing. Squatty little arms. And then we have the same names over here. So we're going to have the subclavian, axillary, brachial, radial, ulnar, palmar arch. His one arm's way shorter than his other arm. Anyways, so that's kind of what's on top. And like I said before, we weren't really going to go into all the detail, but both of these internal carotid arteries, after they go through the carotid canal, they go up to the base of the brain and they form a circle around the base of the brain. It's called the cerebral arterial circle, or the circle of Willis. That's a really important source of blood for the brain. Of course, that's important for our brain to stay alive. So that's one of the main ways we provide blood to the brain. All right, so let's continue here. So what's going to happen now is the descending, after the aortic arch, we have the descending aorta. So that just means that now the blood's going down through the thorax and then down through the abdomen. So there's a area in the diaphragm that allows the esophagus and the aorta and some of those structures to pass through it. And so shortly after it passes through the diaphragm, there's a branch that comes off of the descending abdominal aorta. Or if I should draw. This one's going to come down here. So let's make So the descending abdominal aorta comes down shortly after it goes to the diaphragm. There's a branch that comes off it that's called the celiac trunk. And that splits into 3 branches. One of them is called the splenic, which goes to the spleen. One of them is called the left gastric, goes to the stomach, and one of them is called the hepatic, which goes to the liver. And so those 3 branches are really important. After those branches come off, the descending abdominal aorta continues down. It has 2 big branches that go to the right and the left. Those branches are going to go to the kidneys. So those are going to be called the renal arteries. Then we continue down. Right about where the belly button is, the descending abdominal aorta is going to split into 2 branches. One's going to go down the right leg, the other one's going to go down the left leg. The one that goes down the right leg is called the right common iliac. The right and left common iliacs then split, and you get an internal iliac and an external iliac. These continue down the leg, right about where the knee is. They're going to split, and they're going to form a similar structure to what we saw in the hand. Once the external iliac crosses the inguinal ligament, then this is called the femoral. once the femoral enters in the area that's right behind the knee, it's called the popliteal. And that splits into two branches, the anterior tibial and the posterior. They come together in the foot to form plantar arches. And then there are branches that come off of the plantar arches that take blood to the foot cells. Okay. So, we also have in the abdominal area, we're also going to have what are called the mesenteric arteries, and those carry blood to the digestive system, other than the stomach. And then we also have, what's the other one? Oh, gonadal. And so there's a lot of kind of variation as to when and where these come off of, so we're probably not going to draw them, but the gonadal could also be called the testicular or ovarian, because they're going to carry blood to those organs. And then the mesenterics, superior and inferior mesenterics, are going to carry blood to the intestines mostly. Okay, so here we go. So now we talked again, like we're not showing every single blood vessel, and you can study those on your own, and if you depending on what kind of nurse you become, then maybe you have to know more or less or whatever. But we're getting some of the main ones. It's important to know some of these main arteries and veins, and kind of how they connect to each other a little bit. So now we're going to do the veins, and so we got to draw our person again, this very anatomically correct person. Perfect hands, perfect fingers. Go down here. It's supposed to be a foot. About the right side, but I always make the right arm lots longer. Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. He's kind of turned sideways a little bit. He's kind of like, yeah. Anyways. Okay, so we'll do the heart again in the middle. So same kind of thing as before. Heart sits right on top of the diaphragm. But now what we'll do is we'll show kind of these main arteries and these main veins carrying blood back to the heart, and from the arms, from the legs, the abdomen, and the head. So for the most part, the orientation and the names of the veins are going to be the same as the ones for the arteries. Now there's more veins in our body than there are arteries. That's because when the arteries pump, when the arteries transport blood, they're taking it from the pump, which pushes it out. But coming back, they can't really do that, and so we have to have more distribution to be able to get the blood back to the heart. Okay, but we're going to see a lot of the same pattern. And then we're also going to see some differences. Okay. Oh, and here. Okay. So let's label some of these, and I guess maybe we should do something here. Gosh, his right arm is like way bigger than his left arm. Okay. Ooh, okay, so we have palmar arches that are venous, just like we had arterial ones. And there's more than one, there's different ones, but to this is again kind of a generalization. We have radial veins and ulnar. This would be where the elbow is, just like before. It's going to come together, so this would be the antecubital fossa, where the elbow is. We have brachial, axillary, and then subclavian, and then these are the jugulars, internal jugulars. We'll talk more about those in a second. There's going to be a hole that they also go through, kind of like the carotid arteries. And then we have brachiocephalic. And then we have the superior vena cava. So it's basically the same thing we saw with the arteries. We had the ulnar, the palmar arches, the radial and ulnar. We have the brachial, axillary, subclavian, and then we have brachiocephalic. So the pattern's similar. One thing that's different so far between the arteries and veins is that in the arteries we only had one brachiocephalic on the right side. We didn't have a left brachiocephalic.
Yeah, but then it was
So-
subclavian.
Yeah,
That one.
subclavian just comes straight off the aortic arch. But other than that, they're almost exactly the same. The other thing that we're going to see that's different is, as we mentioned a minute ago, there's more veins than we have arteries. And so when we talk about the veins, other veins in the arm that are going to be important are going to be your cephalic and basilic. So those are really some of the big ones. And they're going to help transport the blood from the hands back to the heart. And so there's one on the thumb side that kind of runs up the top or the lateral aspect of the arm from about where the thumb is, all up, and then it's going to come, it's going to join, let's see, cephalic. Let me think about this for a second. So cephalic joins with the axillary to form the subclavian, and then the basilic is on the pinky side, and it runs up the medial aspect or the bottom, and it runs up and it joins with the brachial to form the axillary. And so those are going to help bring the blood back to the heart. So you need more pathways to be able to get that all back. Okay, in the brain, the blood going to the brain, we talked specifically about the internal carotids. There's other blood vessels that take blood to the brain, but after the blood goes to the cerebral arterial circle, the circle goes around and the blood vessels come off to go to capillaries. Some of the blood substances go into the cerebral spinal fluid circulation. But then eventually the waste products and the blood that doesn't have nutrients that are used and stuff will collect in what are called sinuses. So there are sinuses inside the brain that are around the skull and around the brain and inside the skull. And eventually those sinuses, the blood will circulate through them, mostly because of gravity, and then come out mostly through the internal jugular, the jugular canal through the internal jugular veins, and then that blood will come down and join the superior vena cava. From the superior vena cava, the blood then will go into the right atrium, then through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, it goes to the pulmonary semilunar valve to the pulmonary trunk, and then the pulmonary trunk splits into two arteries called the pulmonary arteries, and then those will go to the lungs. So then those will take the deoxygenated blood that came from the brain and the shoulder and arms and stuff to the lungs. You get rid of CO2, pick up oxygen, and then you go back to what we did on the last picture. So that's kind of the idea there. If we look at the lower limbs, we probably need to put in some of these organs like we did before. So we're going to have the liver. It's going to be over here, sort of. We have the stomach, we have the spleen, we have the kidneys, and then the intestines in here. Let's see what we can do with this. represent that as the large intestines, then we'll say that the squiggly line represents the small intestines. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about this next. So from the abdomen and from the feet, we're going to see a similar pattern that we saw before in the legs and the arteries. So we're going to see plantar arches, and of course there's branches that would feed into that from the feet, but we won't go into that detail. We have anterior tibial and posterior tibial. This is the popliteal fossa, where the knee is, the back of the knee. And this will be called the popliteal vein. Just like before. Then we have the femoral, external iliac, common iliac, and inferior vena cava. And these are both internal. Then they would be the same on that side. Just like we said in the arm, these patterns are almost exactly the same as what you see in the foot. And they run basically parallel to each other. The names of them are the same, that sort of thing. Again, one of the differences in the leg is you have more blood vessels in the leg than you do, more veins in the leg than you do arteries. And a couple of the really common ones are the small saphenous and the great saphenous vein. So the great saphenous vein starts about where the medial malleolus is and runs up the medial side of the leg all the way up and joins with the top of the femoral artery. And so that's going to transport that blood up from the foot up to the, and continue up. So then the inferior vena cava is going to go up through the abdomen. Eventually it will join with the heart. But on the way, there's all these organs in here. So of course we're going to have circulation that's going to go to and from these organs. And we talked about that in the arteries. So we have renal veins. Your right and left. Bless you. Renal vein. And then one of the things we need to talk about here that's really important, that is very different from how the arteries work, is that we're going to develop, or we're going to have what's called the portal system. So the hepatic portal system, basically what's going to happen is the blood from the small and large intestines, the blood from the stomach, from the liver, from the spleen, and maybe a few other places are going to come together and form what's called the hepatic portal vein, which is going to dump straight into the liver. And then the liver's going to deal with that blood, and then it's going to take the blood from the liver and dump it into the, dump it into the inferior vena cava, so that it can go to the heart and then go to the lungs and stuff. And that's going to be the hepatic vein. And so, so let's think about this for a second. So why would that be something that the body would do? Well, if you think about the functions of the liver, one of the main functions of the liver is to store nutrients. So if you get stuff in your digestive system and you don't need to use it right now, we can store a lot of that stuff in the liver. The liver also processes the food that we eat, so it's gonna, in some cases, it's gonna make some things into other things. It also helps make some hormones and plasma proteins, cell membrane proteins. One of the other big things the liver does is it cleans the blood. And so if you eat something or toxin or you take a medicine or you drink alcohol, one of the very first places that those substances go is going to be to the liver. So if all the blood that's coming from the large and small intestines and from the stomach and the spleen, all of those converge together and go straight to the liver, then the liver can process that blood. It can take out the nutrients it needs, make the stuff it needs to make. It can get rid of pathogens if there's pathogens in there. You get rid of toxins if there's toxins in there, and then send the blood on its way so it doesn't go and cause brain damage because of things that are not supposed to be in it. And so that's how this is going to work. So let's draw this in a little bit here. Okay, so this would be the splenic vein, gastric, gastric, superior, and so those all converge and join together to make the hepatic portal vein. And then, coming off of the liver, after the liver's processed all that blood, we form the hepatic vein. And then that blood goes straight into the inferior vena cava and goes to the right atrium. From the right atrium, you go to the tricuspid, right ventricle, pulmonary segmental intervalve, pulmonary trunk, pulmonary arteries, arterioles, capillaries, diffusion of nutrients out of the blood and into the lungs, and so forth. Okay. Oh, I didn't label these. These are renal. So the renal arteries go straight into the inferior vena cava, but these other ones don't. So yeah, so that's kind of the main thing there. Again, there's lots of detail to this. You probably don't need to be held accountable for all of it, but to know, some of these main ones is probably a good idea.